Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 387, Swimming in Lava. Posted by V. Hello, in the last Friday Facts we covered the natural landscape of Vulcanus, which mostly showed the visuals, but as you're probably aware, we always put gameplay first. Now it's time to find out what kind of greater good you can do to the planet. Planet design start. Early in 2021, when Coverex and I were trying to make a high-level general plan of what the expansion should be, it was obvious the direction leads upwards to space, which in our eyes kind of automatically meant also visiting other planets. The obvious next question would be, what is a planet, what does it mean, how is it different from Nauvis, and how many of them do we want? How many planets? In Factorio, progression has always been linked to science. So it is intuitive that every new planet would yield a new science pack, unlocking more parts of the technology tree. This often means a lot of progress is very linear, with some exceptions that you can choose to progress in a different order, for example utility and production science, but ultimately you arrive to a single goal at the end, so we knew one planet has to be the last. But yes, that's kind of confirming my speculation about these planets, that essentially the goal now is to reach this final planet. My further speculation, which is probably a bit more insightful, or at least a bit more of a guess, is that there's some special purpose for the final planet that isn't just producing yet another science pack. I mean, it could be, you never know, but it feels like we're going to do something slightly different on that final planet, but essentially they're explaining that you start on Nauvis, you go to these three other options, and then you finish up on there. That's the end goal now. Since a significant part of the expansion is the space platform with space logistics, it's hard to imagine an expansion with only one planet. In fact, we think less than 2 or 3 additional planets isn't quite making good use of the space logistics. This left us with 4 new planets as a sweet spot between satisfying progression and minimal repetition. I'll be honest, I don't quite explain that properly, I don't think. I mean, logic, the question was, well, why 4 rather than 5? I think their point essentially, I don't know whether they tried it or not. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I think they felt that they could introduce enough new mechanics or, split down the production trees and what have you across 4 planets, meaning, Nauvis, the 3 intermediate ones, and then the final one, which therefore is 4 new planets, plus, the existing one. And that was probably enough new mechanics, etc. They've mentioned before that they never, it's not their goal to create something of the complexity and depth and time required as something like space exploration or even sort of Bobs and Angels, where there's a lot more intermediate steps, a lot more stuff to do what are basically essentially the same processes. So they always indicated that it was more about adding new mechanics rather than just increasing the repetition. What different recipes or resources? As we've already mentioned, while it's easy to assume that Nauvis would remain to be the location of the main factory for most players, we really wanted to avoid the situation where the new planets became just mining outposts. We wanted the player to build something that feels like a worthy factory on each of the planets. After you land on a planet, you need to launch rockets again in order to get back into space. At the start, this is more of a throwback to again experiencing the stranded feeling. This time, the process is already greatly accelerated since you have all the technologies and your space platform can bring you a lot of construction materials. However, building the rocket infrastructure 4 times starts to feel repetitive. So, we definitely aim to have each of the planet's recipes simplify or completely skip some parts. I have to confess, I found that a little confusing, because he's talking about the steps to make rockets in order to get back into space, but then saying that the planet's recipes are simplified. Obviously, the planet's recipes aren't the rocket recipes. You've already got those because you've got into space. So I'm not 100% sure what the gist is there. I think there's a little bit more of an explanation when we get later on that I don't know that the recipes have been simplified for the rocket, but I think there's a new way of making rocket parts basically, or not rocket parts, but the components for rocket parts. So I think that's probably what's being driven at. I also suspect when they mention the rockets, and they haven't really probably dived into this in the Friday Facts, but it was mentioned on Discord but basically, RCUs, rocket control units, are gone, and you just need low density structures and blue circuits now for and obviously rocket fuel to make rocket parts. So that's removed a whole level of complexity, and I think they indicated they were also cheaper. So a basic rocket is now cheaper. It's not 100 parts, or maybe there's a different bonus for productivity or something. One extra module or something like that. But I think basically rockets are now cheaper, and they're unlocked in blue science, so you don't have to go all the way to the end to get rockets. You're getting them much earlier. So I think might be the simplification they're talking about. But whether or not when you get to another planet there is now like a super simple rocket recipe, I don't know. It is very interesting. They mention that when you land on the planet for the first time, you're effectively trapped there by the sound of it. It makes sense because they've already explained that you can't carry stuff in your inventory, and we don't really know the other things. We don't really know how we know how planet to platform works. We don't really know how platform to planet works. We know there's going to be a special animation, and that it requires a hub. But it sounds like, when you think about it, because your hub is required in order to bring stuff down, but you can't carry anything in your inventory, there's no way for you to bring hubs down, automatically or in your inventory, anything like that. So you therefore need to build a hub, which means you've got to be able to do the full production, setup on each planet, because you can't bring anything down. Once you've got the hub, you can transport stuff from your other planets with space platforms. But until you've got a hub, you're trapped there. Well, until you've made rockets, you're trapped there, but you can't get anything down off of your platform. So you could have your platform bring a load of stuff with you when you arrive, but you've got no access to it. So you've literally got to start from first principles by the sound of things. And that does make sense. You've only got your equipment. I'm not even sure you can carry ammo, I think they said, but you'd literally be, hitting rocks with your fists again. So I hadn't really thought about that, but it does make sense. The expansion generally puts a lot more emphasis on the stability of your factory, but it's Factorio and some things always go wrong. It's easy to imagine your Nauvis or space platforms aren't having the best time while you're on a different planet. To prevent locking of progress if Nauvis gets cut off or completely overrun, we need to include a way to craft pretty much all of the rocket parts on any planet. Again, just kind of confirming really that you need to be able to build rockets on every planet. So that means iron and copper and plastic must be resources that you can produce natively, organically, on each planet. Because otherwise, as that example gives, it's a little unclear whether, at what extent you're going to be able to bring stuff down from your platform. But platforms could get cut off because your base gets overrun with biters back on Nauvis with no way to make a rocket. That's game over. But it's a soft lock. It's one of those, you didn't really do anything wrong as such. You just lost the game because there's no way for you to recover from a situation. So yeah, it's interesting, when you really think about how a interplanetary system has to work, it's a lot more complicated. All of this combined means that when finding the theme and resources for planets, they should generally slot into some area of Factorio in a nice way, while being fresh and unique too. And because we apparently just love contradictions, we want an experience that feels new without having to learn too many recipes per planet. So what they're saying is new stuff, but not too complicated. As again re-emphasising the point that they have clarified that, or they have stated that their aim wasn't to build something as super duper complex as SpaceX, but more to build an expansion that adds things that only they can add because they're developers, and they can go back to the source code and add to it, edit it, etc. So yeah, more confirmation of that. On top of that, adding new recipes was made even more difficult due to the recycler, which was already in the game as part of the quality branch before we started work on any other planets. If an item has an alternate recipe, it's not clear which ingredient should be returned on recycling this item. This makes adding alternative recipes pretty much a no-no. It's good to have confirmation that we're not getting alternate recipes, if I'm honest. Although it does sound like we're going to have alternate recipes for very basics, very basic intermediates and stuff. So more on that later. But in terms of, basically the point is, if you've got a separate recipe for green circuits, just as an example, instead of the, whatever it is, 3 wires and, is it 2 iron plates or 1 iron plate? I can never remember. But instead of that, 3 bits of copper and an iron plate making up a green circuit, maybe you'd have another recipe. Now that you've got tungsten, you could do a tungsten version of the green circuit, and that required one tungsten plate or maybe, 2 iron plates and 1 tungsten wire, because tungsten wire is super wire. Once it's made into a green circuit, unless you're having something like quality that identifies it as being different, the game doesn't know which recipe to recycle it into. You could randomize it, I guess. You could have a randomization approach, but then you run into the situation where if, for example, tungsten is hard to produce, if it has a random ratio that's better than simply building it, you get into, returning the amount of stuff that's actually gone into it. So if it was a 50-50 chance, but you could only make, tungsten version of green circuits at a ratio of 1 to 10 compared to the original recipe, you would end up with more tungsten simply by recycling, which is something they've stated they don't want with recycling. So there's that, complexity. One of the reasons that that's in there, I think, is because a lot of mods do that, particularly Angels, and Angels is very relevant to this. It's interesting. That's kind of what my current playthrough is, Angels, on my live streams. But for Angels, you've got all sorts of different ways. Angels doesn't change any of the basic stuff, so you still make green circuits with exactly the same recipe. You still make inserters with exactly the same recipe. There's no super inserters. There's none of that stuff. Instead, it reworks the whole intermediate production chain. So you have, I've found 4, I bet there's more, ways of making like iron plates and steel and all this sort of stuff. There's a lot more complexity to the basic production, but you have multiple different ways of recycling. So in Angels, if you recycled an iron plate, you could get iron ore, you could get iron pebbles, you could get iron rocks. There's also like a washing process, so you could probably get that out of it. And of course, then you've got this whole problem of, well, what are the ratios? How does it return? How does it know what to return and what proportion to return? Because the whole point of what it does in Angels is it makes iron ore rare, basically. So you're using if you were recycling it back into iron ore, you would be, tricking the system into getting more of the one that you want, if that makes sense. And it brings up an interesting question of how this is going to affect those mods. I don't know how they're going to, maybe a mod just doesn't have quality in it, and that's how it gets around it. But if you, recycling, basically, because that's, part of quality. Otherwise, as I say, it breaks all of these mods that have alternate recipes. So yeah, that's an interesting conundrum, because I don't know. All I can think is that there's a way of doing quality, recycling differently that allows you to specify either what the percentages are or what have you, that is going to be open for modders. But otherwise, it seems to basically kill off that whole thing that a lot of mods do. We had a rough plan on how many planets we would like, some general limitations we knew we needed to follow, and some disconnected ideas for mechanics and features. Then we asked Arundel to attempt to fill these buckets with both visual and gameplay themes which, apart from the planet terrain you've already seen, translate into new recipes and machines. The Foundry. The main crafting theme of Vulcanus is metallurgy, and this large structure is its main representation. So we've got some absolutely gorgeous new assets here. V goes on to explain how they were put together, but this is the new Foundry. V doesn't actually confirm during this that this is this, but if you look at the design of this, to me this is the sort of scientific, the sort of, what do you call it, like the tech tree or the icon representation of the Foundry. Because if you look, it's pouring iron out, and it's also orange, which that's there. So to me that's what that is. By the way, looking at this from 2, it's got to be this is one per planet. That's kind of the conclusion I've come to. The lava thing, that's Vulcanus. This is the bioplanet, and this is the electric planet. Basically, I'm not sure if I explained that. They were blurred in one of the Friday Facts, the names of the planets, and they used AI to decode them on the Discord. And basically, I can't remember what the actual names are, but basically the main names are, Vulcanus, which means like metal, basically. There's then one that's basically like greenery, like plants and stuff, and one that means lightning. And if you look at this, we've got, Vulcanus, smelting, metal, something that could easily be, it's green, that could be a bioreactor of some description, and then lightning, so we're going to be doing something with lightning. So these are clearly one per planet, of the new planets. That's what's going on here, and we're going to get one of those, each of these per new planet. Visual design of the Foundry. Heavy, industrial, powerful. Often it's enough for Arundel to create concept art just by drawing in 2D. But this machine has a lot of massive moving parts with a lot of rotational movement, looping animations and space restrictions for each part. This made Arundel block out most of the main shapes in 3D, and to do so in a lot more detail than usual on the left. Later, he would do a new drawing over the grey render to figure out the details and textures on the right. From there, it was down to Jersey to build this monster into its final form. The reason this is a proper sort of inserted video is there is actual sound to it. The caption says, you can probably tell Jersey had quite a good time. So hopefully that sound is coming through. I'm not sure on the recording this particular way of doing it. But this is the Foundry. It's a pretty big beast. We can see that it is, I think, 5 tiles big. Is that right? So it must be 5 by 5, sorry. So there'll be a tile there, tile there, tile there, tile there, tile there. Unlike the original design, it looks like the number of pipes is variable. Or is, well, not number of pipes is variable. That instead of, the way this design looks, it has pipes on all of the connection points here. Now it may be recipe dependent, I guess, but we've actually only got the 4 connection points to pass through. So it may be recipe dependent. But this is it running through. We'll play it through again. So the sound is great, I think. It's really sort of gloopy and, you know, it sounds like liquid moving around. But just to explain this slightly, let's pause it. This, I assume, is just an offshore pump. I don't know whether we're getting like a super offshore pump in some way, but this is just an offshore pump. It is pumping lava, basically. So the lava, you just pop that in and it pipes it in there. So no indication that we need, you know, steel pipes or anything like that, which I'm glad about because that's always a little bit tedious in some of these mods. But it seems like it's just a regular offshore pump, regular pipes for the lava. And then you've got the Foundry, you know, glooping away and smelting and all that sort of stuff. And it's pumping out liquid molten something. It must be, well, this is where I got a little bit confused, if I'm totally honest. And it does explain it like towards the end. But this here is the calcite, okay? And it's loading in the calcite. And I was a bit like, so it's melting the calcite? I don't understand. But it's actually processing the lava. Now we can't see the recipe on it. My assumption, because this is orange, is that it's making molten iron. And what you get out of it as well is stone as a byproduct. Now if you look at this, we can't obviously see how much is pumping through, but you can tell that this pump is not really pumping. It's moving very, very slowly. Occasionally, there you go, tiny little jog, and this machine just keeps working away. So that, to me, suggests that a single pump, a bit like for steam engines or something, single pump is going to be able to support loads of these machines. But notice how much stone we get out. So it's doing one tiny little movement every so often and presumably filling this entire thing up with lava. And then you're getting loads and loads of stone out. And that, as I was speculating last week, is why you have to dump it out, why you have to get rid of the stone, because you just get so much that it's useless. But it also then introduces a bit of a mechanic of having to manage byproducts, which isn't something you really have to do in the main game. You can obviously turn it into stone bricks and, you know, walls or, you know, what have you, concrete maybe. So you don't have to just get rid of it. But the point is you're going to get tons of stone out. The other thing that's interesting here is that, as I say, you're putting the calcite in and lava in. There's no sulfuric acid going in. But this must be water, mustn't it? I mean, that's got to be what's coming out there. So it looks like water, which I was mentioning before. There's no direct source of water on Vulcanus. Water appears that it's probably a byproduct of any process that involves calcite, which, as I said in last week, sort of makes sense because you can get water out of calcite. The other thing to this is, and they do sort of explain what's going on, but as I say, very little calcite is actually being put in. So it sounds like it may be one of these processes where, you put the basic thing in and use a tiny amount of calcite and you get tons of, byproduct out of it. And so becomes all about, managing that volume. because it is absolutely thumping out the stone. But yeah, looks like a great thing. Sounds great as well. Also, my comment from last time, now that we're really zoomed in, the lava looks great. I didn't, especially this bit. This bit really looks like lava. But yeah, I was a bit unsure about how it looked, but this zoomed in version looks really, really good. So yeah, I really like that. A lot of work also went into the sound design between Ian creating the sounds and Donian implementing a new system for how entities can play sounds. I'm sure you can expect a Friday Facts about that one beautiful day, but for now we can just marvel at how the Foundry looks and sounds. It is more than just a Vulcanus Furnace. From the visuals, it is apparent it's going to require a lot of energy to run, but what do we get out for the investment? The Foundry can handle molten metals or even lava itself. The unique recipes on this planet are about tungsten processing, which eventually leads into the metallurgic science pack made in this machine. So here it is, here's the new science pack, and we know it's called, and this is going to be terrible for pronunciation, metallurgic? Not 100% sure how to pronounce that, but yes, we get the metallurgic science pack, orange in a blue, in a round beaker rather. So, it says, I'm not misreading this, please correct me if I'm misreading this, but eventually leads to metallurgic science pack made in this machine. So that to me is saying that the Foundry is how you make the science packs as well. Perhaps you feed in lava and tungsten or something, and that's how you get these metallurgic science packs out. I don't know, but it does, to me, appear to be saying that the Foundry is what makes the science packs. It's been mentioned above how alternative recipes are a problem in part due to recycling. This isn't the case for smelting and chemical processes, as the recycler returning ingredients of these transformative recipes just doesn't make any sense. So recycling an iron plate would just return an iron plate with 25% chance. This is important because we can have the foundries use different recipes for smelting without any issues. Bringing the foundry back home to Nauvis or any other place feels very rewarding because it recrafts very quickly and you can start distributing molten iron and copper instead of the finished plates. Better yet, from the molten iron and molten copper, we can cast more advanced items like iron gear wheels, copper cables, or even steel directly. Recycling in an iron gear wheel will still return iron plates, but it's less efficient than making the iron plates from molten iron straight up. So, a hell of a lot to unpack there. Firstly, although they were saying they weren't going to do alternate recipes, they are doing alternate recipes. However, those alternate recipes are for basic intermediates. So, what's essentially being said there is that the foundries aren't just going to make molten iron, molten copper, that sort of thing. They can also then be used to turn that molten iron and copper directly into intermediate products. Because this is the other thing, although this planet's about tungsten, we don't actually get to know anything about tungsten based from this. So there must be another Friday Facts coming. But this is basically taking in what therefore I assume is the iron. In fact, that's a point. I'm wrong then, aren't I? I hadn't realised that. Why is that bright blue? I guess it's bright blue rather than regular blue. So, just a correction then. This is not outputting water and copper. It's outputting iron, molten iron, and molten copper. I wonder why they've gone with... I guess because the iron plates have a blue tint and obviously copper is orange. But that's molten copper and that's molten iron. It's not water. Interesting. So I just saw blue and assumed water. So that is the molten iron. So I wonder if that's actually directly connected to that. But basically that's the molten iron coming in. And iron is then being directly turned into... And notice that this is only just jogging away. So these two machines are producing all this stuff with only a tiny little... only using a tiny amount of the iron that's in there. So it does look like you can stack up loads and loads of machines. But basically these are then outputting what I assume is iron plate rather than tungsten and iron gear wheels. So there's a shortcut basically. And it sounds like it's beneficial to do it. So it's not just that it takes out a step of making iron gear wheels. You get more iron gear wheels out of when cast straight from iron, which would make sense when you think about it. If you take an iron sheet and turn it into a gear wheel, you're going to get offshoots and bits and pieces and what have you. If it's directly cast into an iron gear wheel, you're just going to get exactly what you put into the cast. So it sort of makes sense that it would be more efficient. Copper-wise, we can make copper wire straight out of molten copper. It doesn't really indicate whether there's any others, I don't think. Oh, steel. It doesn't show steel, but apparently we can make steel straight out of the iron, which is getting into the angels territory, which is interesting. And it sounded from the description there that actually, we'll get more iron, more steel from using the molten iron directly, which is another thing, is like hinting that they're trying to keep the game so that it can be played on as many machines as possible, so that it doesn't, when you're scaling up and you've got 5 planets on the go and big factories on each of them, they're giving us shortcuts. So steel is obviously notoriously difficult to produce in very high volumes and is kind of one of the limiting factors for the game. We're getting a way of making steel, directly and quickly. And presumably, in better production volumes, so that, effectively put 1 iron ore in and 5 iron ore in to get 1 at the moment, where, now we can maybe put 3 iron ore in and get 1. They also come on to a point that these get a separate productivity bonus. But also, they're not limited to the Vulcanus. We can build these absolutely anywhere. They are big boys. That's a 5x5 machine, so you could fit a lot of foundries and assemblers into the same space. But presumably it all works out as, far better to build these rather than the normal machines. It does hint, and we can't see any power on this. It says they're more power intensive. I'm guessing they've got, an infinite thing on the go somewhere. But there's no power poles. So is it electricity that's powering them? Or do they derive power from their, whatever they're smelting? The other one that's interesting, and it comes on to describe this, is that this is making low-density structures. It's making them out of copper, plastic and steel, so it's not, creating them out of tungsten or something like that. That's what they're saying about not having alternate recipes. But these are being made directly out of that. And clearly the idea, or the implication to me, is that rather than build assemblers and foundries and and smelters and all that sort of stuff, you just build foundries, and you can pretty much make 90% of what you need in terms of intermediates. And it's only really like higher production stuff that you use. None of these have calcite being fed in, so it looks like calcite being used here is probably just in that level of process. It's not in this level of process. And it says, and because we want to make specifically the rocket part production easier, the foundry can also craft the normal recipe of low-density structures. Copper and steel plates for the low-density structure are much easier to craft too. Interesting, it says copper is. I guess that's because you get better ratios out of the foundries. But steel, being easy to produce is kind of massive. That's completely reworking everybody's factory, basically. Perhaps the biggest advantage is the Foundry has a built-in 50% productivity bonus, which can be further boosted with the machine's 4 module slots. Wow. So basically, again, this is coming back. I bet these are expensive to make, and I bet the power demand is huge. But basically, giving us ways to make loads of stuff with fewer machines and, simpler sort of chains of doing so. So you can do bigger in the same footprint and therefore with the same, CPU type cost, basically. But this is also clearly as well targeted towards this point from earlier about the fact that, when you land on a planet, you need to be able to build rockets to, get off the planet and do anything from that planet. So they're giving you a nice, easy way of making low-density structures. You just need to make copper, plastic and steel, and then a foundry will just make them for you, basically, straight off. Big mining drill. Tungsten ore is hard to mine, and normal mining drills aren't capable of it. At the start, you can find tungsten ore in rocks all over the surface on Vulcanus, but with this mining drill, you can start to mine it in large quantities the way we like it. So that's just a quick confirmation, as I wondered earlier, how you get started with tungsten if you can't use mining drills to mine it, and it said you couldn't hand mine it either, presumably, and obviously that's not practical anyway. How do you get your first bit of tungsten, do whatever you need to get tungsten? Are you going to need tungsten to build the mining drill for tungsten? Didn't make sense. But it turns out that the rocks around Vulcanus have tungsten in them. The new usurper of natural resources, the new exploiter of planetary surfaces, the new cause of mass pollution, powerful enough to mine tungsten ore. The visual design of the big mining drill. Mining drills are an essential part of Factorio. I would even argue it's one of the most important entities. Side by side to the iconic assembly machine for crafting, there is the mining drill for planet exploitation and devastation of the environment. This means we put a lot of thought into the visual design. The key words for the electric mining drill were redesigned it in 2019 were aggressive ground penetration, violence and power exerted against the soil. We have followed this direction again, but we wanted to exaggerate all of these even more and represent that it can wreck the land faster and in a bigger area. So here's the images of it. They go on to explain this in a bit, but this is the new, big mining drill. You can't really tell as such here, but it is bigger. I mean, well, if you know what the grey boxes represent, they are the tiles in the game. So you can tell that the 3x3 is the normal mining drill, and this is 5x5. So it is a great big monster. Very similar visual design. Obviously, it's red as its key colour. And these are the drill bits, basically the bits that are in this carriage that digs into the ground. It shows an animation of it in a minute. But yeah, that's what it is. It's a great big version of the existing mining drill. Being bigger and more massive tends to invite making the entity taller. But if you remember, we already walked this path before with the electric mining drill. Well, we soon after realised we needed to attach it to the ground more, so we did that in the last minute before 1.0 release. For the mining mechanism itself, we chose a set of 4 excavating wheels which circulate inwards when the ore is being sucked up by the mechanism above. And these are the wheels. They're basically just like, digging arm things. They look pretty dang brutal. I wouldn't want to be stood anywhere near that. We have doubled down on the ground-attached rails that the mining head travels on, and we have raised the holding structure in the direction of the output, which gives the drill directionality and taller presence than the electric mining drill. Once we had agreed on the design and Arundel finished the concept art, we let Jersey off the chain again. So, new animation again, proper animation with sound. I have to confess, it doesn't sound particularly different to my ears from the original mining drill. It probably is, and I'm just not comparing them side by side. I would imagine as well it's going to be louder in the game, but you can't really tell that without a comparison point. But it does look, bigger, sturdier, chonkier. What is interesting, and I say this may be sort of a bit of a guess, really, but if you remember this. This is on tungsten, basically, and that's the point. This can mine tungsten. But look at how infrequently a single piece of tungsten ore is coming off. They're really quite spread out. This I'm sort of previewing for the next bit, and these could have modules. Maybe this hasn't got any, any modules in it, and these have got modules in them, and maybe there's, research has been done. But notice how these two mining drills here, on their own, are filling a belt, where these are mining uranium, and you notice they've got the connection point here. If you noticed on the original version, those are going to be the connection points for the acid, I think. Those are the pass-through points for the acid, and that's obviously the output, for the machine itself. That's what I think that's showing, because you've got pipe here, look, pipe points. And then you've got 2 pipe points there, which they've connected. Yeah, I think that's what those are showing. So normal mining drills, you still don't need the fluid, but those you do. And speaking of that, this confirms that you don't need any kind of special fluid. So we don't need acid in order to mine tungsten. But in the assumption that these are working, basically at the same speed, I think these might be increased because the gears on the top seem to be going quicker. Slightly, but what I think this means is that the hardness, the mineability of tungsten is a lot lower than the regular resources. So again, these two on their own are completely filling a belt of copper. So I think that to me suggests that tungsten has like a higher hardness, and you can't get as much out of it per mine, and that's actually then compensated for what the next bit that they explain. It is more than a Vulcanus mining drill. It would be pretty weak if the only use of the big mining drill was to just get tungsten. So it is also a direct upgrade from the normal mining drill in several ways. It has a much larger area of effect, 13 by 13 tiles, which is +4 from the drilling edge, which is very convenient when placing them in irregular areas like around lava. It harvests faster, with a speed of 2.5 per second compared to 0.5 per second of the electric mining drill, almost double the speed per occupied tile. It has 4 module slots, so you can insert 3 efficiency modules, lol, and 1 speed module to keep around 80% less pollution while boosting their speed. We're not going to use efficiency modules. Speed and prod modules, that's what we're going to use. I say that it's probably quite electrically expensive, so you probably would actually, maybe want to consider efficiency modules, especially on Vulcanus, which we'll come to on in a minute. But yeah, those 3 points, much larger mining area. So the +4 tiles is basically saying, so these are the tiles. So if you go out by 4 on each side, that's the area a single big mining drill can mine, which is huge. I mean, that's an enormous area for a single drill. It may also be a bit confusing where it says 2.5 seconds compared to 0.5, which is 5 times as much, and then says almost double the speed per occupied tile. But the point is that a 3x3 entity, you could fit, you'd have to ratio it up and stuff, but the number you could fit in this area is more compared to the number of mining drills. So even though you're getting 5 times as much out of a single entity, you could fit more level 1 miners in the same area. And so it's saying per tile. So if you say it's 0.5 and it's 3 by 3, then it's 0.5 divided by 9 versus 2.5 divided by 25. So that must be double. I can't do the maths in my head. 4 module slots, yeah. So as I say, probably end up using efficiencies, as I say, if power is a real problem for it. But imagine it with 4 speed modules, or I guess 4 prod modules might be, or some prod modules, and this is getting into, again, the territory of aping a lot of mods. A lot of mods do give you higher level drills, but yes, 2 drills able to completely fill an entire belt is pretty awesome, considering how early you're going to get these in the game. Additionally, it has a unique property, the reduction in resource drain by 50%. This new stat means the resource underneath only gets its richness depleted half of the time. In other words, this directly multiplies with the productivity of the drill, and you can imagine how crazy mining productivity can get. Better yet, the resource drain percentage is affected by the quality of the drill. At legendary quality, a big mining drill only drains the resource 17% of the time. Such a drill is mighty expensive, but that resource patch you're about to place them on sure is going to last for a while. To me, this is another bit that's sort of geared more towards when you're interplanetary, because having legendary quality drills does seem massively expensive, but if you can completely mine and patch, because it has a 13 by 13 area, with a single drill, or 2 drills for example, and they make the patch last, I mean, if it's 70%, is that 8 times or something like that, 7 times as long as a normal one? Add in, you stick 4 productivity modules in it and put some beacons on it and stuff like that, and you're basically saying that you don't need to come back and add on 10 more patches. You can just make sure that your one drill is providing all you need, basically. Again, it's helping you manage multiple planets and not have to continuously go back and forth between them to set up a new patch, to replace your drills, to blah 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 blah. It just means you can put it down and it'll be 50 hours before it runs out rather than 2, sort of thing. So yeah, all really, really positive and great things. Recipes and resources. Apart from these 2 structures and tungsten processing, Vulcanus has some differences compared to Nauvis. Sulfuric acid can be mined directly. There is no water on Vulcanus. Water is instead created from sulfuric acid. There is no oil, but coal is plentiful, and we have moved coal liquefaction to Vulcanus, also adding a simplified version which doesn't need heavy oil to kickstart it. There is no uranium at all. Lava is used as a resource and processed in the foundry into the molten iron and copper with stone as a byproduct. The planet has no natural stone, iron ore, copper ore deposits as a result. Calcite is a new resource used as a cleaning or purifying ingredient in various recipes like sulfuric acid neutralization, lava processing, or melting iron or copper ore. Okay, so kind of confirming some of the speculations I had. As I said when I was first reading this, I thought water was coming out of this, but it isn't. That's iron, molten iron and molten copper. So it does appear to confirm. It doesn't directly say it, but clearly the sulfuric acid neutralization, and the sulfuric acid is water is instead created from sulfuric acid. It's what we suspected last week, that calcite plus sulfuric acid equals water, and maybe some stone as well as a byproduct, but basically that's how you get your water in order that you can do your oil production. Speaking of oil production, coal liquefaction is now a science by the sound of things that can only be unlocked once you've gone to Vulcanus. I might be misreading that, but to me that's what that's saying, that's now a tech locked or unlocked on that planet is how you get coal, basically, how you get oil from Vulcanus. They also indicate, they also state that there's a simplified version of the coal liquefaction. That to me means that there's the normal coal liquefaction is also there, but basically there's a equivalent of a basic oil production where you would get just petroleum. There's now a basic coal liquefaction which you don't need heavy oil to start, but once you've got some heavy oil, you can then use that to do higher level coal liquefaction. Maybe there'll be a third type of coal liquefaction as well that gives you more of the optimum ingredients. No uranium at all. So we know that this planet is closer to the sun. We saw on the other Friday Facts about basically solar irradiance. So it sounds like solar panels would be more productive on Vulcanus, but we also know that the planet is riddled with ridges, or whatever you want to call it, for the volcanoes. So in other words, placing solar panels will be a nightmare because you would need 1 million cliff explosives to clear out the area, and then we know that landfilling lava is a later game thing. So basically you can put a few solar panels down, particularly on the ash, the ash area, but really this is a coal burning planet basically. It's interesting there's no mention of using lava for power production. I think that's a little bit disappointing if that's not, you can't use it in that way. It would be nice to just have something like that, I think, as an alternate way of making power, particularly since you can make, they confirm you can make water out of sulfuric acid. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of a disappointment. And that calcite is cleaning, purifying in various recipes, lava resin and molten coal. So that is clearly why, when we saw the Friday Facts before, let me just find it. Yes, here we go. So this one, let's just open that image and let us zoom in. So I was a little puzzled last week that they seem to be bringing calcite to this planet, but not tungsten, that I could tell. And that, I think, explains why we are going to be required to use or that's not right, is it? Because we know that, if we're getting the ore production, they're not ore, but the new molten iron, molten metal recipes that require calcite to use. So I don't know why I'm struggling with explaining that. But this one here, if this is taking lava in and using the calcite to turn it into the molten stuff, it doesn't specifically confirm it, but perhaps you also have to put calcite in if you're trying to make, so if you're putting in, raw iron ore, do you also need to put calcite in so that you can make it into the molten ore? Maybe that's why the player is bringing calcite in. But because of how it's phrased, it also implies to me that perhaps it's used in something else. This statement of cleaning, purifying ingredient in various recipes. So we've only found out about those ones, so there must be other recipes that involve it. So maybe that's the point, rather than you use it for the molten. production, you have to use it for some other later recipe. There's going to be something that requires this calcite, and that's why it's being brought to this planet, because it's an important intermediate step. Conclusion. Most of the initial rules and ideas, together with Arundel's great work on the first prototype version, still remain on Vulcanus to this day. We have just refined the experience over time. When you're focused on designing individual systems, you always aim to get a sophisticated result with intricacies and cool complexities. A small amount of increased complexity was one of our earlier objectives, but we found that after adding alternate resource sources, new sciences, and new gadgets, then it was already complicated enough. When you play the game as a whole, you need to automate and take care of so many things which can quickly become overwhelming. I think that's a bit of a nod to a point I've made quite a lot, that particularly experienced players, you get blasé about how complex the game can be, and that in particular you can get overwhelmed quite quickly, I think, if you're a new player, where you unlock, loads and loads of recipes, and then you just don't know what to make next, and suddenly you're having to make 15 different items, all with requiring iron and copper, which you've not got very much of, and it can all get a bit overwhelming. And I think that's their point, that they have to build this expansion so that someone playing new with both isn't going to get overwhelmed. The initial gameplay prototype included some intermediate items and mechanics that we have now, like tungsten, would first need to be turned into powder before being processed. Any kind of melting and casting recipe would also output slag, which is used for nothing but reprocessing. Back then we couldn't void items in lava. If an intermediate is only ever used for one thing, then perhaps it should be more useful or be removed. Both of these items ended up in a situation where they only slowed down progression, so they were removed. So the idea presumably there is they had some kind of crushing machine for the tungsten that would turn it into a powder, and then it could be, combined with iron or something to make, I suppose it would combine with tungsten carbide maybe. Or just, smelted from the powder. So basically an intermediate step where you process it into powder. Again, it's very similar to a lot of mods. A lot of mods do that sort of thing. But it sounds like they decided that was just adding an extra step for the sake of adding an extra step. And they could have used the tungsten powder in some way, but I guess they figured it was just easier to get rid of that step. Melting and casting would also output slag. So slag was clearly just an extra thing. Interesting mention of reprocessing, which tends to suggest that you could take slag and sort of reprocess it to get even more iron and copper out. Again, very similar to sort of angels and those sorts of things where that's what they do. So yeah, from a personal point of view, sort of pleased that they're not going that far. I say, I have been enjoying the overhaul mods, but I think it does get a little bit tedious, and particularly for newer players, or perhaps people who don't play the mods or aren't that interested in them. I think that would all be a bit too much, a bit too repetitive and tedious. On the other hand, the idea to extract iron and copper ore from lava was something the first prototype did include, and we discarded it. After some time, we have realised that just mining ore and copper ore again, the same way as on Alvis, isn't very appealing, so it eventually made its way back in. If you have to build multiple bases, then it's important to reduce the points of repetition between planets so that nothing feels stale. Over time, we have consistently tried to simplify and cut excessive things. If something is repetitive but can't be cut, then we can add a new twist or a new shortcut instead. This has been the case since Arundel's initial version and every iteration since, so now we can get through all the planets while keeping the gameplay fresh. Everything presented above is obtained from trigger technologies, which ask the player to craft some items specific to Vulcanus. While the Foundry and Big Mining Drill are very exciting when you start using them on planets other than Vulcanus, we still haven't shown what you could unlock with the Metallurgic Science Pack, perhaps some other time. Please feel free to come melt our hearts with your beliefs that only children use the word big for machine names. You won't be wrong. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it speculation. Again, I've done it, throughout the video. I think it really looks good. I really like the mechanics they've explained. I think they're getting a level 2 mining drill, a bigger one, and the new smelting mechanics, all great. Sounds as well like it's really going to mix up gameplay. So endgame becomes less about spamming down 1 million foundries and 1 million mining drills and 1 million belts and all that sort of stuff, and instead becomes about using different machines which are much more productive, and how do you sort of, it becomes that the problem of how do you fit them into the space and that sort of thing. How do you get beacons on them? And because one of these things with these bigger machines, assuming they're not exempt from beacon, activity, because they're all now the size of what's it called? The oil production. So we're going to be able to get more beacons on them as well. So not only do they have more slots internally, and they also have a inbuilt productivity. I think I mentioned in a previous Friday Facts that they'd mentioned additional ways of getting productivity, but not explained what they were. With that, with the couple of mentions now, I think that's what they're getting at, that some of these machines will just have inbuilt productivity. So even though they're more expensive and more difficult to use, more energy intensive, you get more out of them. So you want more of these rather than the original stuff. And you also then get a performance benefit of, fewer machines means fewer numbers being crunched. So yeah, I say overall really love them. I really love the design of the smelter in particular. My feeling now is that this is something to do with biological stuff, because one of the planets is biological, we believe. And one of the planets is lightning-based. What the heck that could be doing? It could be aluminium. I mentioned aluminium before as being, in fact, last week I was constantly mixing up aluminium and tungsten. But aluminium, I think, may still be a resource, and that because aluminium, you actually make it on Earth by, using electricity basically because of, it's difficult to process it basically. But yeah, so some kind of what would you call it, electrolyzer or something like that, tends to be leaping out to me here. What else that will be doing, but also this kind of hints that although these are like this is just a very simplified representation, and the actual machine can be gigantic and have loads of moving parts on it. So it'll be interesting to see what these actually look like and what they do. The other big takeaway from this for me is we found out nothing about tungsten. What is tungsten being used for? Is this just tungsten in some way? And if so, why is that all that we use it for? What is tungsten used in? Because it sounds to me like this is made from iron and steel and copper and what have you, the normal stuff that you need. Yeah, but you make it, or you unlock the technology for it by building the first one. So since tungsten is presumably not needed in its production, or processed tungsten, what is tungsten used for? You would expect tungsten carbide drills to be a thing if you're going to have tungsten, but not. I'll leave my speculation standing from last week about maybe tungsten pellets for destroying asteroids and that sort of thing. But yeah, you would tend to expect tungsten carbide drills, mining, to be how it's done. But this tends to imply to me that actually this is just made out of steel and stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. But we don't really find anything about how you process the sulfuric acid to make the water and that sort of thing. All we're really finding out is how you use foundries and big mining drills to mine normal resources. We find out nothing about the new resources as such. But yeah, I say really excited for this. This is exactly what I wanted. This was bit more complexity, but with unique mechanics and unique features that you can't really do via mods. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday over on my Twitch channel at Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Regular pipes for the lava.